Oh, I don't like that.
That's smoke, Janie. It's just a fire.
Jesus Christ. Oh, no, that ain't just smoke, dude. That's a mushroom cloud. Oh, wow. Holy crap. Okay, guys, this is another video from Wendigoon. This is the second one of his. I've watched. First one was amazing. Again, just such an easy guy to listen to. The way he tells the stories. All these guys that we've been watching, reacting to here, such magnificent storytellers. This one is the controversial missing children milk carton program, and that just piqued my curiosity because I'm old. So I actually remember when that first became a thing, when they started doing that whole thing with the pictures on milk cartons. And I'm not sure what controversy it would be in reference to, but it just got me curious about it. I mean, it's always been
Hello, everybody.
something
Today
everybody
we're going to
kind
talk
of
about the
pokes
story and
fun at,
controversies of the
and
missing children milk carton
who should be
program.
on a milk carton.
Even if you've never heard of this program, you're
Oh,
probably
yeah.
familiar with its objective, which was putting the photographs of missing children on milk cartons across the United States.
Yep.
The program, which began in the 1980s, was meant to raise public awareness about the epidemic of missing children and, more broadly, the concept of stranger danger. While the program's effects have been very widespread, and there's at least a couple
My parents
success stories
encouraged
from
me
the
to go with
program,
strangers.
including a very bizarre instance that we're going to talk about today.
Oh.
Many remembered the milk carton kids for the eventual controversy and downfall that the program would acquire.
See, I
And
didn't
if you've
know
ever seen
why the
a
program
picture
went
from
out.
a movie or TV show that
It's gonna be
shows
good.
a missing kid on the side of a milk carton and wonder, why don't they do that anymore? We're going to
I
talk
have.
about exactly why they don't.
Well,
do that
thank you.
anymore. So if that sounds interesting to you, stick around as we talk about the problems, cases, and history of the missing children milk carton program.
This is going to be good. I
Which
am.
will almost undoubtedly be useless information to everyone watching, but it will also be depressing for whatever that's worth.
We got
But
that
before
going
I
for
fill
us.
your brain with more useless, depressing knowledge,
Good stuff.
let's talk about something that's neither useless nor depressing, like today's sponsor, Magic Spoon. Magic Spoon is the low-carb,
I
keto-friendly breakfast
honestly have
that's gluten-free, grain-free, and soy-free as well. But
have
not only that,
always wanted
Magic
to,
Spoon also has 0 grams of sugar.
know what happened to
13
that.
14 grams of protein, only 4 net grams of carbs, and only 140 calories per serving. And if
Magic
you hear all
Spoon.
that and think, what's the big deal? Then you clearly haven't tried Magic Spoon.
That's
or
the kind of
seen
stuff
my
I should be
previous
eating.
ads, because you'll know that the most magical thing about this cereal is that
Maybe
it tastes amazing. too.
last a few
As matter
extra
of fact,
months
last
of
time we
life.
talked, I was on a hunt to find the source of Magic Spoon's hidden power. And since then, I have gone on a hunt for Magic Spoon itself. And around me, you can see my war trophy, participants in today's ad. And while it's true that those you see around you have been mercilessly hunted by yours truly, if you think about it, that's really Magic Spoon, the company's fault. See, they send me about a dozen cereal
Is that
boxes. a
night
month to
vision
do
goggles
these
he's got
ads.
on
But
the
if they think that a dozen was enough to satisfy
antler head
me,
there?
then they clearly haven't tried their own breakfast. Because once I start, I can't stop. So Magic Spoon forced my hand,
That's
and I
nice of 'em.
began sourcing
Give
my
the
supply from the local
skull something to
wildlife.
look at.
But I can assure you that everything you see before you now has been ethically sourced, and is really the cereal's fault for being so delicious. So if you're like me and want to get in on this fantastic breakfast option,
He really is
without
good.
committing the sins that I will one day tell God about, then you can do that by going to the link in the description at magicspoon.com.
He opens boxes the way I do, too.
To get your Magic
Just
Spoon
rip
order
at it.
for $5 off.
I don't
That
read
is
directions.
Right. You can get $5 off your order at the link in the description. If you're looking for some recommendations, some of my favorite are the chocolate chip cookie, the s'mores, the cinnamon roll, and the fruity, although you really can't go wrong. Again, that's magicspoon.com/Wendigoon to get in on this deal today.
I like
Thank you all
cinnamon
so
rolls.
much for watching the ad. Thank you so much to those who witnessed these crimes and didn't alert the authorities. Thank you so much to Magic Spoon for sponsoring the video. Really does mean the most. Hope you all check them out. Link is in the description. And we are... I made the tower of cereal, and if I don't knock it over, people will be mad, so...
You kind of gotta. There we go.
And we are back to the video. We're going to go ahead and get into it, but as always...
Those are such
thank you
effective
for
ads.
watching. Also,
Damn.
before we get started, check this out. My buddy Bryant made the Wendigoon logo into a real thing, like with the night vision mount and the deer skull.
That's cool.
It's like
Oh, so that's what. Okay.
Real. He's so cool. I'm going to make sure he stays somewhere on this wall for the foreseeable future.
That
So
is
thank
cool.
you, Bryant. Now, to understand how the Missing Children
Okay,
Milk
so that's
Carton
his
program
logo.
came to be,
Duh.
we need to take a look back at the first instance of someone putting a kid's face on a milk carton.
Yeah,
And
like
to
I
do
say,
that, we need to understand
remember
how the whole milk
distinctly.
carton thing worked. In the 1960s, paper milk cartons became the main form of milk distribution in order to replace the more expensive glass bottles. Since these paper milk cartons were cheap and pretty quickly produced
Ernie
with a
Banks.
wide audience, it became common for companies near local dairies
That-
to advertise
that's something
on
I
the
can
side
remember
of
what
milk cartons.
Ernie Banks looks
So by
like.
the 1980s, it was very common to expect some kind of messaging or advertisement on the side of the milk carton you buy at the grocery store. Now,
Yeah.
strangely, there's a lot of debate online as to which child was the first to show up on a milk carton, but I think I found the correct timeline of events. In Des Moines, Iowa, on September the 5th,
Oh, wow.
1982, a paperboy
That
by
face.
the name of Johnny Gosh
I just-
was missing. Johnny
Gosh.
was 12 years old at the time, and every morning,
Seen
Johnny
his
and his father
picture many
would
times.
ride around the neighborhood as Johnny rode on his bike and his father followed him, as Johnny would throw newspapers to all the houses on the street. The night before Johnny went missing, he told his father that he felt he was old enough to do the paper run on his own.
Oh,
His
boy.
father said no and told Johnny to wake him up before he does the morning route. But it seems that the next morning, again September the 5th, Johnny didn't wake his father and instead
shit.
took his bicycle,
Poor Johnny.
red wagon full of newspapers, around the block by himself. People around the neighborhood began to call the paper company, saying that their paper hadn't come that morning, and after Johnny's father went looking for him, he found his son's red wagon and bicycle tipped over 2 blocks away from their house. During the investigation, a neighbor had said
Oh,
that they had seen
shit.
Johnny
This stuff
talking to
bothers
someone
me.
in a truck while Johnny was still on his bicycle. But according to that witness, it just seemed he was asking the guy for directions, and the two parted ways. Beyond that, no clues as to Johnny's disappearance were ever discovered. This disappearance was a big deal and stayed in the public conscious for
That's
the next
why-
couple years, especially when a similar disappearance occurred in 1984.
Having
On
cameras
August 12th,
everywhere sometimes isn't a
1984,
bad thing.
A month shy of being 2 years exactly from Johnny's disappearance, another paper boy, this one Eugene Martin, also went missing in Des Moines, Iowa. Eugene's case was very similar to Johnny's. Eugene was 13 years old and had gone out
was a
to do the
paper
paper
boy
route
for a
that
short
morning
time.
and was
Nobody
never
ever
seen again.
was
A witness
interested in
came
taking
forward
me.
and said that, very similar to Johnny's case, Eugene was spotted talking to an unknown man at around 5:45 in the morning. This was the only information the public had to go on, and given the similarities between Eugene and Johnny's case, many of the locals believed that the two disappearances were linked. However, what happened immediately following Eugene's disappearance that didn't happen following Johnny's disappearance would change the concept of missing children in the United States forever. Eugene Martin had a relative
This
who
is
worked
really
at the
interesting.
local Anderson and Erickson dairy. Again, the disappearance of Johnny and Eugene was a huge deal in Des Moines, and Eugene's relative
I would think.
felt that if people knew what the kids looked like, then they'd have a better chance of finding them. So Eugene's relative approached his boss at the Anderson and Erickson dairy and said, what if, instead of running the normal ads that we run every week, we instead put pictures of Johnny and Eugene on the side of our milk cartons? The owner of the dairy thought this was a great
Wow.
idea, and in September of 1984, for the first
So that's
time,
how it
photos of
came
missing
to be.
children with the word missing rolled out in grocery stores across the city. And from there, the concept spread really fast.
Des
A couple
Moines
months
was
later, in November of
groundbreaker.
1984, Walter Woodbury of the much larger Hawthorne Melody Dairy in Whitewater, Wisconsin, was visiting Des Moines, Iowa on a business trip. While in Des Moines, he saw one of the Anderson and Erickson milk cartons that had the faces of two missing kids printed on the side of it and thought it was
hey,
an
what a
incredible
great idea. Yeah.
The Hawthorne Melody Dairy was so big that part of its distribution range was Chicago, Illinois.
Oof.
So
Now we're
Woodbury
getting
goes
exposure.
to the police chief of the Chicago Police Department, tells him about his idea to put missing kids on milk cartons, and the Chicago police also thought that it was a great idea. So it begins to spread to
yeah, I don't know
newspapers
why-
around the country.
why you wouldn't
that
think it would be a
Chicago
great
is going
idea.
to begin showcasing missing children on milk cartons to raise public awareness. A month later, in December of 1984, Stephen Glazier, the future senator of California, sees this in the paper and thinks it would be a great idea for the entire state of California. So a statewide campaign is launched in California, and nearly every large dairy in the state begins putting missing children on the side of milk cartons. So seeing this as a way to raise awareness for missing kids,
every once in a while we do
the
decent
newly
things
formed
as a
National
society.
Child Safety Council
Once in a while.
creates a new program that will be nationwide and use a database of missing children to be printed on milk cartons across the country. And this program was called the Missing Children Milk Carton Program, founded in December of 1984. The first child featured on a milk carton at a national level was Eden Patz. Now, Eden's disappearance predates that of Johnny and Eugene's.
Oh, wow.
However, Eden's case became much more high profile. On May the 25th of 1979, a 6-year-old Eden Patz went missing from his neighborhood in Lower Manhattan. Normally, Eden's dad would walk him down the short stretch of sidewalk in front of his house
to me, these stories,
to get to
though.
the corner of the street
I can't
where
even
Eden's school bus
imagine
would stop every morning. This morning,
having
on
my
May the
child go
25th,
missing.
Eden was excited because it was the first time he got to walk to the school bus alone. However, after leaving his front door to take the short walk of a few dozen feet to the bus stop at the corner of his street, Eden was never seen again. Whenever Eden didn't show up for school that day, the teacher just assumed he was sick and didn't think to call it into the principal or his parents.
So you got a late
It wasn't
start
until
on
that
everything.
evening when Eden didn't come home from school that the parents decided to call the school, only to figure out that he had never been there, and then call the police. Despite over 100 police officers, a team of bloodhounds, and nearly the entire neighborhood
that's
searching
a lot
for
of
him,
hours
Eden was never found.
Yeah,
The case
that
was
got
so
wasted.
high profile that Ronald Reagan made May the 25th National Missing Children's Day. And despite the Missing Children Milk Carton program beginning 5 years after Eden's disappearance, Eden Patz was seen as such a widely known case and a case that people wanted to see resolved in some sense that they decided his would be the first face to show around the country. There's a lot of confusion and conflicting reports online as to which face was the first to appear on a milk carton. Some say it was Johnny's, some say it was Eugene's, and some say it was Eden's. But as I just explained, all three are technically correct. Johnny and Eugene appeared simultaneously as the first kids on a milk carton, and Eden was the first one to appear nationally on a milk carton.
Okay.
By March of 1985, the program was widely adopted, with 700 out of 1,800 dairies in the country being a part of the initiative.
Wow.
And according to the National Child Safety Council, in April of 1985, sightings of missing children had increased by 30%. However,
oh, hell yeah, you gotta believe it was having an
of
effect.
missing children are very different from children
Being
no longer
covered.
missing.
Yeah.
And if you're hearing all of this and asking yourself, so how effective was the Missing Children
Yeah.
Carton program? Then, well, now it should also be mentioned that the faces of missing kids weren't exclusive to milk cartons. There were also cases of the faces appearing on envelopes, trucks, billboards, grocery bags.
I did see
pizza
them on
boxes,
trucks. I remember
and
that.
even utility bills. So the question,
wow.
whenever you have all of these different avenues for people to see children's faces, is, are they actually working? And it seems that the end result is we don't know. Of course, there was the odd circumstance where a child was found and a witness would say that they saw the kid's face on a pizza box or milk carton, but those were few and far between. Even by the most generous estimates, like the National Child Safety Council saying that sightings of children increased by 30%, which is, again, from the people who are hosting the program. A 30% increase in sightings doesn't mean a lot unless there's a relatable number of children recovered.
Right.
Some of the only numbers we have for how the program performed, at least relating to milk
identity
cartons,
of
are from the
large
days
chunk of
whenever
them.
the program was just starting to take off. Like, for example, a report by the LA Times in 1985, whenever California was one of the first states to adopt the program. In the first few months of the program in LA, the LA Times said that out of the 14 children who were shown on a milk carton, 7 of them have been returned home. And while you may hear that and think, oh, well, 50%, that's pretty good.
Yeah, but
hold on. That's assuming that all 7 of these children were returned home because of the effect of the milk carton.
Right.
When it turns out only one of them was, and even then it's just kind of. All 7 of these children were not abducted, rather they were runaways.
Excuse me.
And in each case, It seems that it was an older child, 14 to 17 years old, who decided to run out and party with friends for a week or two, and then
came back home.
And during that time they were gone, the parents called the police. The police filed them as a missing child, so their face wound up on a milk carton when they were really just out on a bender.
Yep,
the one out of the 7 kids who were
experiencing
in the
life.
milk carton program said that they were gone for a few days and saw their face on the news and their face on a milk carton and decided to come back home. But even then, from everything I read, it seemed that the kid was just out partying for a week. They didn't move out. But the news just simply said 50% success rate, and that made more people decide to
really
get on
caught
the
on.
program.
Yeah.
And it seems
Lit
that
a
across
fire
the
under the
country,
program.
numbers were fudged in a very similar manner. One of the statistics I kept hearing from politicians and law enforcement around this time was the 2 million number, saying every year 2 million children go missing, which is an insane estimate by anyone's standards.
Yeah.
But the narrative, even if it was never officially stated around this entire culture of the 80s, and especially the stranger danger epidemic, which is something that's a bit out of the scope of this video, was that all 2 million of these missing kids were abducted and swept off the streets by these no-good, low-down strangers who roll into town, steal a few kids, then roll out. And it began to contribute
actually a really
to this
small
era of fear
percentage
in the public that you couldn't let your child out in public, even if you were with them, because there was always a shady van around the corner ready to sweep up kids.
Free candy
I'm sure
van.
That several of you watching either lived through or had parents who lived through the era of anti-stranger PSAs or these videos that would teach children to never get in a car unless they had a password that your parent would have told them at some point, and to never talk to
all this
people
stuff.
at the grocery store and all kinds of stuff like that. And while that's not bad in itself, of course, everyone and their children should be prepared for bad people, it was an insane mischaracterization of the statistic.
Yeah,
For one,
I get where he's going.
Loaded.
Yep.
By most estimates I've seen, the 1.8 to 2 million figure is people throughout the year who told the police, maybe, that their child was kidnapped, and less than half of those turn out to be legitimate. It's just parents who lost their kid in the grocery store for 2 minutes. And according to a Department of Justice survey from around this time, out of all of the reported kidnappings, they could confirm 800,000 as abductions that police looked into. You may hear them think 800,000. That's still a
lot, but we still got to break this down further.
800,000, the Department of Justice said that 115 of those were stereotypical abductions. And by stereotypical abduction, I mean a scenario in which a stranger
somebody actually
a child
snatched
and
the
kept
kid
them overnight. So 115 out of 800,000, not a lot. Of course, it's still a tragedy and still 115 too many, but compared to the population of the United States, that is a very small number. The vast majority of missing children's cases are either children running away or divorce disputes.
I was just going to say
specifically
domestic
cases
disputes.
during a
Yeah,
divorce where
I was
one
going
parent is given custody
I was
for a long
wondering
time,
how often
and
that
the
is.
other parent either takes the child away for some time or
And they
picks
call
up the
and
kid
complain.
when they're not supposed to, and it causes a spat where one party calls the police. The issue was, all of these cases, even cases of children running away for a day or two, then coming back home, were getting lumped in as missing children. And the issue with that is that it went on to define an entire era of child rearing. There was an entire generation of kids who had their neighborhood shut down Halloween for fear of all of the random unmarked vans that they feared were ready to pick up their children. And there were schools who would shut down sporting activities.
And I remember this era. It was
outside for fear
epidemic.
of all the strangers who could be lurking in the bushes. So, rather comically, there would be a lot of scenarios where a family would buy a milk carton that had a missing kid on it, and then the parent would set down the kids and be like, all right, now to make sure you don't wind up like Billy here, make sure you do XYZ. It turns out Billy just went and stayed at a friend's house for a few days before coming back.
Probably was 15
and
and getting high.
Kids about human trafficking rings. That led to another aspect of the milk carton program that quickly fell out of public favor. And that was the fact that if any family bought milk, which was most families in the United States, the missing child was now a centerpiece at their morning breakfast. And this effect was twofold.
That's true.
For the adults who saw a different child's face every time they went to the supermarket, they became desensitized to the kids they were seeing and stopped thinking about the intent
commit
of the
it to
program,
memory,
which was to look for this specific child. Whereas the children who were sitting next to a child their age every morning with the words, "Have you seen me?" or missing across it, became more and more terrified. Pediatricians
never
Benjamin
thought of it
Spock
from
and
this
T. Barry
angle.
Brazelton were very open critics of the milk carton program because they said they had seen several children who developed this acute sense of paranoia after seeing so many faces of kids their age on these missing person cartons. And again, this would be fine if the milk carton program was saving children.
Right,
I
if
think
there
we can
was
all agree that
any
the
number.
life of a child is more important than the comfort of another child. But as mentioned, it was debated if the milk carton program was doing any good at all, other than scaring kids and just vaguely raising the idea of
I
stranger
didn't put
danger.
any of this
A lot
together.
of the language and practices
Wow.
I see around this time seem like
All
an
makes sense.
overcorrection for me. In the 50s and 60s, children just kind of went missing, and either from runaways or just going off with strangers, and people just kind of let it slip. So in the 80s, there was this massive course correction.
We always
where
overcorrect
any
in
statistic
America
that had to do with a kid
on
not
everything.
being at home at night was added on to scare all the other children into never talking to anyone ever. What also
staying
didn't
in
help
your
was
room.
the juxtaposition
Become a neat.
between the milk carton program and the nature of missing children. See, there were several cases of people thinking that the milk carton program was a good idea, and pretty much across the board in the beginning, everyone thought it was a good idea. Until, children started to get scared of anyone taller than them, but that's different. But there was this
I always
period
thought it
of
was a good
time where
idea.
people really liked the idea. And every time that they would see a new child's face, they'd sit down with the family and be like, okay, this kid is Bobby Lawton. And he looks like this. He's about your height. So if any of us see Bobby,
that my older
tell a
kids
police officer.
were kids.
And it was doing what the program was supposed to. It was getting families thinking about this missing child. And especially with some of the language I've seen around it, politicians had this weird Timmy stuck in the well mentality. Like, oh, these kids just got away from home. Let's go get them. So people kind of got blindsided by, the nature of missing children. Because I probably don't have to tell you, but even in the modern age with tech and search equipment being as great as it is, if a child is kidnapped or even gone out of their house for more than 48 hours, the chances of finding them alive
yeah,
are
that I
not
knew.
great. As a matter of fact, the majority of child murders
I was
happen
wondering about that as he
shortly
started
after the
to
initial
unfold
abduction.
this.
And the time it takes for an investigation where the police are called, they do a search, they file the child as missing, and then a local dairy
shows up on
gets a picture of the child.
I was going
and then
to question
puts
this
it
very
out
thing.
to be printed on their milk cartons and then distributed in stores. Not a good time.
Way too much
So
time has
while
passed.
near the end of the program, like I mentioned, a lot of the faces on milk cartons weren't really missing children. They were just children who were filed as missing for one reason or the other. Even in the beginning, when it was like these high-profile missing children cases, by the time that face got to the dinner table, the chances of that kid being found weren't good. So it created this atmosphere where families would all invest themselves into this child, and then either through the news or talking to the police, it would be like, oh, well, what happened to old Timmy? And the police would be like, oh, his remains were found in the forest outside of town. He'd been there for weeks, it seems. Oh, what about little Sally? Well, it seems that Sally was kidnapped by a human trafficking ring, and there's really no lead on the killer. She's probably out of the country at this point.
Right. Oh.
And then that guy has to go home and tell his family that. And then another kid shows up on a milk carton, and that cycle continues until everyone's tired of seeing it. So once again, public favor began to fall. And while I've talked about a lot of the problems with the Missing Children milk carton program, it wasn't without its success stories either. Including one of the most bizarre, crazy child abduction cases ever, which was that of Bonnie Loman. When Bonnie was 3 years old, she was kidnapped from her father by her mother. Bonnie's mother and stepfather spent the next couple years living in Saipan and Hawaii with Bonnie, hoping that they would eventually lose heat from the police as they had just kidnapped a child.
Yeah.
Eventually, they moved to Colorado around the time that Bonnie is 7 years old. At this point, because, again, Bonnie was a kidnapped child, she hadn't been enrolled in school or allowed to talk to really anyone outside of her mother and stepfather.
Great life
but
for
in
her,
Colorado,
though.
Bonnie began to make friends with the neighbors next door, and her father even took her out to town on rare occasion. On one of these occasions, they were walking through a grocery store, and Bonnie looked in the dairy aisle
And there
to
she
see
was.
her own face on a milk carton. Now, since Bonnie was never placed in school, she wasn't able to read and didn't know that just above her face
It said
was
missing.
the word missing. Bonnie was a child and just saw her face on a milk carton and thought it was weird. And in one account I heard from Bonnie,
Wow.
apparently her stepfather introduced the picture to her. Like they were walking through the grocery store and he's like, oh, would you look at this? Here's your face. Like, talk about overconfidence. So
Yeah, I
the
guess.
stepfather
Cockiness.
bought the milk carton because Bonnie thought it was neat. And after they finished the milk, he let her cut out her own picture on the side of the milk carton and keep it. So Bonnie would just play with the picture of herself on the milk carton because she thought it was neat.
Yeah.
And one day she
Mom
had
and
left
stepdad
it in a
didn't have
box
too many
full of Barbie toys
fucking
that
issues.
she had taken over to her friend's house. And after leaving that box at her friend's house, her friend's parents opened it, saw the picture of Bonnie with the word missing above it, called the police. The police came and arrested Bonnie's mother and stepfather and returned Bonnie back to her dad. And that is, at least to my knowledge, the one time that a child's
Wow.
face on the side
And
of a milk
where
carton
there were a lot of hoops to jump through
100%
in getting
directly
there.
led to the rescue of the child. And again, there were other cases of people saying that a child was saved because someone had recognized the picture from a milk carton.
I'm sure.
But Bonnie's the time that the milk carton did the heavy lifting.
Right.
Can you imagine the bizarre nature of that? Of
No.
seeing your own picture
No.
on a milk carton and then getting older and realizing what that meant. Like, what a bizarre moment in history. But again, cases like this were few and far
Wow.
between, and most people continue to build criticism for the campaign as a whole. Another large criticism of the campaign was that the children featured on the side of milk cartons were overwhelmingly white, and normally whenever a minority child was shown on the side of a milk carton, it was a local program rather than a national program. So, as you could imagine, people didn't take too kindly to that. And it seems
I never
as
thought
the
about that, but
program went on,
I don't remember
like I
that
mentioned,
well, but
it went from high
I don't
profile
remember
missing
any
persons
children of color on
cases
them.
to just a series of cases where children were reported missing, with a lot of them just being spousal disagreements or runaways.
Yeah, it's gotta
And
be a
with
lot
those
of
later
spousal
The
disagreements.
police, the judge, and everyone knows that the parents got into a fight,
Hmm.
and one of them took the kid for a bit, and they're going to go to court, and everyone knows where the kid's at. So that person doesn't need random do-gooders stopping them on the street because they saw the kid's face on a milk carton. And a lot of people seem kind of stumped by why the quality that's a weird way to say it, the quality, why the requirements for missing children kind of dissolved over time. But I think there's a pretty easy explanation. Adam Garfinkel, a historian, notes that over
Garfinkel.
the years, the government began to offer tax breaks to dairies who would feature kids' faces on the side of them
shit.
because it was seen as a public service. Which means in the later years of this program, the more kids you show on a milk carton, the more you can
Cha-ching.
get taken off your taxes. So I think I know why they quit caring. It also
Oh,
didn't help
man.
that a lot
Yeah.
of the poster child cases for the milk carton program did not have happy endings. For example, Eden Pass, the
I'm
first
sure.
one who was shown nationally,
Ooh.
was never found, and several of the details around the case are very grisly. Initially, there was a suspect who was arrested and questioned,
Oh,
who
boy.
was a serial child abuser, but then they can never get anything on him. And then in 2017, someone else confessed to killing Eaton and went to jail, but then the validity of the confession has been called into question. Eugene Martin was never found, and there was never a lead in the case other than the person he talked to that morning in 1984. And Johnny Gorsh's case is particularly bizarre. In 1999, again, there had been no lead in Johnny Gorsh's case. He was the one who his dad found the wagon with the papers in it
Right.
that morning in 1982. And from 1982 to 1999, there were no substantial leads in the case. Until in 1999, Johnny's mother said just in a conference one day that in 1997, two grown men showed up at her house, and one of them claimed to be Johnny. She said that Johnny had a very specific birthmark on his chest, so she checked his chest, and sure enough, it was Johnny. So Johnny comes into her house, and they talk for an hour, where Johnny explains that he was kidnapped by a ring of human traffickers, and here, about 20 years later, had just now gotten out and likely would never see his mom again, as he is still in hiding from the traffickers. The police investigated her claims.
What the
never
hell?
found any leads. Someone came out saying that they
That's
knew
freaking
Johnny because
bizarre.
they were also kidnapped by that same ring of traffickers, but then that guy turned out to be lying. And a lot of people think that Johnny's mom just had a bit of a mental break. and made the
Yeah, I was
story
just gonna
up.
say, sounds
and
like.
then in
yeah.
2006, Johnny's mom came forward again, this time with a photograph that was left on her doorstep that depicted three men tied up and gagged, and one of them, according to her, was Johnny, now grown up. However, a police officer in Florida said that he knew the picture because a similar
Oh,
thing
man.
happened in the 1970s when the picture came across his desk as being a group of kidnapped people. So the police officer looked into the case and was able to track down all the men in the photograph and found out that it was just a willing photograph that the three men took. And it seems that in 2006, someone played a
So
very
bizarre.
sick prank
Yeah.
on Johnny's mom by reusing the photograph, making her think that it was her own
That
son.
you got to
So
be
that goes
pretty
to
fucked
say
up to
a
get
lot
a
of
jolly
these
out of doing
cases,
that.
even the high-profile ones that the
God
media would use
damn.
as a benchmark, left people feeling more disturbed
Should
than
put
encouraged.
whoever
So
left the
between
picture there
debatable
under a
overall
prison.
impact, the false attribution of missing children, the terror it caused both adults and children, the non-reporting of minority missing persons cases, and allegations that stem from tax breaks given to dairies, you can probably see why the program quit. The final
Crashed
nail in
and
the coffin
burned,
for
yeah.
the missing children milk carton program came in 1996 with the invention of Amber Alert. The Amber Alert program,
Oh, yeah.
which is something I've talked about and you're probably familiar with, allows the authorities to give real-time updates on the children, descriptions of the children, and
Yep.
descriptions of their captors and the vehicle they're using. Amber Alert allows people to have real-time updates, especially in that first crucial period of time
Right,
after
where
the
it's
child goes
where it
missing,
actually has
in
a
way
chance
that
of
the milk
helping.
carton program never could.
Right.
And similar modern advancements in technology have allowed much better chances for children that go missing. For example, in 1990, about 62% of missing children were found alive and well, whereas in 2011, 97% of
Holy
children were
shit.
successfully recovered. And Amber Alert seems to have
Wow.
a significant part in that factor, as in a 2022 survey, 1,114 successful recoveries have occurred because of Amber Alert. And while I've talked about a lot of the
Well, that makes
controversies
sense. I mean,
surrounding
obviously the
milk carton
technology would
program
take over.
today, I truly believe that in the beginning and throughout all of it, there was at least a remnant of good faith.
Oh, yeah.
people
Well
looking to help
intentioned.
kids.
Yeah,
In the beginning,
absolutely.
it was entirely done out of the kindness of people's hearts. And the fact that 700 dairy plants around the United States took a cut of their profit, because remember,
Right, they weren't
the kid
getting that ad
occupies the
revenue.
space that an ad normally would. The fact that they did that,
That's
and by
pretty
some
cool.
estimates printed a total of over 5 billion milk cartons with missing children's faces, says a lot. And
Yep.
yes, numbers were
Agreed.
bloated to incite public
Agreed.
panic, and once tax breaks became involved, it became a whole business
Yeah.
decision. But at least in the beginning, it was just people looking
I
to help
I
kids.
love the way he
While
looks
the
at
milk
things.
carton
This is
program would slowly
just what I was
fade out
thinking.
in the years following the invention of Amber Alert in 1996, many believe Molly Bish in 2000 to be the last child ever featured on a milk carton. And sadly, as with many children featured on milk cartons,
Never
her body would
found.
be found 3 years
Oh,
later.
was found.
I think the milk
Oh.
carton program is fascinating. Because,
Ooh.
again, it comes from a time whenever people began to overcorrect for the, frankly, negligence that children received. Up until things like the Missing Children Milk Carton Program and the National Child Safety Council, there was no way to distinguish a missing adult from a missing child. And nowadays it seems ridiculous because the
There
rules are completely changed.
weren't a lot
rules
of
for
things
searching
done
and
to
information are
protect us in
completely
the
changed,
60s.
But at the time,
Trust
it was
me.
just treated the same across the board. And things like the Missing Children Milk Carton program began to bring the concept of missing children into the public conscious to a degree that it eventually led to changes across the board. And had it not been for that program, things like Amber Alert and modern rules dictating how searches can be done and how quickly searches can be done for missing children never would have happened.
Right.
So even if the program devolved,
as I said, it was so well
where
intentioned.
it
You
kind of
can't
lost
deny
track of what
that.
it originally was, and there was a lot of controversy that it scared kids and led the public wrong. I still think it was an overall good.
Yeah.
Because when I look at figures like 1,114 children saved because of Amber Alert, that number never would have happened if it wasn't for the faces of Eugene Martin and Johnny Gorsh showing up on a
The
Des
first
Moines
milk carton.
milk carton in 1984 that set all of it in motion. And I also think it's interesting to learn
Very
about,
fair.
because there was an entire generation of people who their childhood before school was growing up and looking at the face of a child they probably never knew,
My older kids.
but now would be ingrained in their mind forever as the missing kid who ate breakfast with them every day. It's such a bizarre and weird moment in history to think about. And again, one that I think was necessary, but almost has this macabre nature whenever we look back on it.
Yep.
And I think it's fascinating. And if you stuck around this long in the video, hopefully you think it's fascinating too.
I
See,
do.
I told you it would be depressing. And even if it was depressing, I'm still glad you're here and stuck around this long. And it means the most to me. And I just want to
gotta
say
tell you,
thank you for watching. Thank you all so much for sticking around. This is a weird topic, I know, but I guess that's kind of like
I want to hear the outro, but I got something I want to
tagline for the
point
channel
out
at
to you
this point,
guys.
just weird stuff. I was watching a YouTube video where someone was talking about old cartoons and how they used to make jokes out of people on milk cartons.
Oh yeah,
And I was
all
like,
the time.
I bet there's some weird history to that. And sure enough, I start researching and
Oh,
find
yeah.
all these, like the tax break stuff and people complaining that it was scaring kids and all of that. And I was like, aha, I was right. There is weird stuff. So I had to immediately tell you all. So hopefully you enjoyed the video. It's something I don't think gets talked about a lot. There's a few other YouTube videos I watched on the topic that were pretty good. But I wanted to bring it to you guys, and hopefully you enjoyed it. But yeah, I think this kind of stuff's fascinating. Like, just these weird little footnotes in history. Because when you look at it in the scheme of, like, you know, modern police investigations, even missing children, it's just kind of a footnote, right? It's like, oh, for a while we put kids on milk cartons. When you think about the implications of that and, like, the logistics of it, it's so wild, and the way it was marketed to people, I think it's fascinating. But you've heard enough about that at this point. But again, thank you all so much for watching.
Well done again,
This will be my
dude.
first video in... What month is it? November, yes. Very tired. This will be my first video in November. I have some big plans. I don't want to give too much yet. There will be another cool video coming out December. Hopefully you all enjoyed the Brown Mountain Lights video I did. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
Yeah, I got to catch up
so
on those
hopefully
for
December there should
so I can know what he's talking about. But I will tell you this: having grown up in the '60s and '70s, back then things were entirely different, and that's why they talk about the good old days. My generation, you had so many creeps out there, a lot of them, because if a school teacher did something inappropriate and a child said something about it, more often than not, it was like, oh, stop making shit up. That's how it was treated. Because it was a teacher, they couldn't do that. If a minister or priest was doing something inappropriate, stop making that up. And at the very least, they might take the child out of that situation, but they wouldn't rat on anybody because you don't want to ruin their life or something. So, yeah, the good old days weren't always all that good. They were really creepy. I could make a video about that, having grown up and lived through it. It's, not the best of times, as some people in my generation would have you believe. But this was very interesting to me because I always wondered what happened to that program. Well done.
Jar Jar, look out!
Yeah, Jar Jar's annoying. Yeah, I get it.